this comes out of work that we've been doing really over about 10 years or more, really, on the economics of science. I mean, Terence has always been interested in these areas and got me interested in them as well. And the reason that we're here at this conference, I think, is that Juan and the organisers thought that this was rather relevant to Hayek, because through the well, as we've heard, the whole conference is about the knowledge problem, if you like, and various aspects of the knowledge problem, different dimensions of it, and the work that we were doing, especially in a paper in 2014 in research policy with respect to science, very much emphasizes tacit knowledge as being an extremely important element, and that involved in that paper was a criticism of, I mean, a common criticism in a way, and it goes back to the absolute fundamentals we've been discussing all the time, but a criticism of established neoclassical methods of analysis, if you like. And so this is this particular, oh, thank you for your attention, I'm going the wrong way. Here we are. This is, oh, you can see that, ignore a lot of these overheads, you won't be able to read. You won't be able to read them. They seem to have, are they all like this? Oh no, that's a bit better. So let's, with luck, they might improve. But I thought it might be a good idea to put a summary of this this talk, so you could have a sort of view of where I was heading. Essentially, we're arguing that the established view of economic growth has knowledge as a public good at the center of the growth problem. It's really saying that we really can't rely on any form of market process to produce economic growth because of the public good problem. Now, I've said this is a consensus view, but so I'll talk a little bit about the nature of knowledge implied by that consensus view first. Then we go on just to look at the empirical evidence in its favour, because it leads to certain conclusions. And actually, even for an economist like me, you know, it's surprising, really, in some ways, how poorly this kind of performs. This measure. You wonder how it has dominated the profession quite so much, given you know, given that if you look at the data, there's such limited support for it. And we argue the root of this problem is that this bifurcation, if you like, between a very well established sort of paradigm and lack of empirical support for it. Basically this goes back to the specification, if you like, the epistemics, if you like, behind the normal analysis. And so we emphasize the tacit nature of new knowledge, and that fits in very much, obviously, with the Hayekian topics that we're discussing today. On the other hand, there's more to be said about that than simply, well, okay, scientific new knowledge, new scientific knowledge in particular, is tacit. What do we mean by that? Can we really say that it's tacit in the sense of almost uncommunicable to others by means of data or written documents and so forth? You have to experience it to understand. Well, to some extent, yes, but exactly how do we apply this notion of tacit knowledge to scientific, new scientific developments? And so, essentially, the argument will be that within groups of people, they come collectively to an understanding very much following on really from what Pavel was talking about just at the end of the last lecture, I think, that understanding is generated in a sense communally by exchanges within the group voluntarily. But this knowledge doesn't just spill out willy-nilly to anybody. In other words, the public good paradigm doesn't really apply. This is slightly different. It's knowledge that spills over to people who are taking part in the generation of new knowledge. So that's the essence then of how the whole system then begins to behave differently. And so we designated this view of scientific knowledge as knowledge not as a public good, but as a contribution good, and argued that fits nicely into a more evolutionary framework as well. At the very end here, I've got the contribution good model is consistent with classical approaches to competition and Hayek's conception of competition as a discovery procedure. So again, it follows on nicely, I think, from what Pavel was saying, that this quite classical approaches to competition I had in mind, the earlier classical economists and how they might have viewed the competitive process rather than the rather static conception we have in all the textbooks of perfect competition and so forth. Right. Okay. Well, so just going back now to the beginning, I've just put up here to remind ourselves the assumptions about the nature of knowledge in standard theory. I put a few references at the top. I'm sorry, I haven't taken a presentation skills course for some time, so there's far too much stuff on here. It's more a set of notes for Terence and I to write up the paper afterwards. But the essential points are, I mean, the papers that I've cited at the top are from mainly written in the 1950s, very early 1960s by Nelson and Arrow, and later by Roma. These are great figures in the history of economics and in growth theory in particular, and the latter one in so-called endogenous growth theory as well. But they all have, all of those papers anyway had, Nelson has very evolved over time in his thinking about these things, but all those papers have in common a set of assumptions about knowledge and epistemology, if you like. Knowledge is non-rival. My consumption doesn't affect your ability to pursue the same thing. It can be made partially excludable only by the use of patents. Or, as Roma puts it, designs, or the applied technology which is embedded, or by attempts at secrecy, of course. So essentially, knowledge is inherently very difficult to control, and can be made excludable. And if you want markets to develop, the argument goes you need exclusive rights in order to trade. The entire stock of knowledge, I've said third, is publicly available and accumulated in stocks of patents and so on, and these are freely accessible. The term free access is used a lot. Exactly what it means is open for discussion. Again, there's a tremendous amount to discuss in this whole area, but I will have to skip over a lot on the way. But that's the terminology one would tend to use. So we've got a non-rival good, very difficult to exclude others. The entire stock is available freely. And insofar as any risk or uncertainty about the future is involved, it tends to be presented in a way which is analyzable by, I suppose, Robbinsian methods of maximization. And so you have to assume that people they may not know about the future exactly, but they can deal and choose between probabilities of outcomes. It's as if they're trading in lottery tickets, if you like. Then you can set up a world which is kind of amenable to neoclassical analysis, but which is kind of way away from the reality, as we'll argue. And I think the most important of all, of course, 5. Knowledge is explicit and codifiable. Roma refers to a stock of disembodied knowledge i.e. knowledge in books. It's just saying somehow this knowledge is always conveyable through literature or data, numbers, things which I don't know are in journals, professional journals, and so forth. And when it comes to new knowledge, well, it can be analysed as if there is a meta production function. That is a technology for producing new technology. If you're in this super rational world of maximising agents, they've got to be maximising something. They've got to know what constraints they face. And as we were saying, where are these constraints coming from? What are they? In standard theory, people just know what technology and the production possibilities that they imply faces them. They know that technology, but then we're not even in that world now. We want to know about moving the production function, if you like, the production possibilities further out. So we want to change those production possibilities, make them even better in terms of the possibilities available. And so we need some kind of technology for changing technology. So you get yourself into that kind of system of thinking. That's the way we set up. That's the sort of epistemology behind standard theory, and I think it indicates very clearly how how abstract and rather divorced from probably the reality it is. What are the implications? Well, there are various positive conclusions I've said here. The first conclusion is that competition reduces the return to research and development. So the question, I'll come to the question of what we mean by competition, not to discuss it in detail, but just to sort of revisit some things that Pavel has said. But the idea here, of course, is that competition reduces the return to R&D because it's a particular definition of competition. It's a rather bizarre kind of conclusion when you think about it. To me, I can't imagine that any R&D could take place without competition. Indeed, it's part of the competitive process. But we are in this position of, if you start thinking in terms of static economic theory, competition actually will reduce the return to R&D. Obviously, people can pick up new technology at no cost to themselves, immediately go into production. Obviously, it's going to reduce profits very quickly. So you get that rather startling conclusion. Monopoly, in a way, is necessary for progress. This is a great sort of standard trade-off in the way that the conventional economist would look at things. Well, it's a pity, but we've got to have monopoly if we're going to have progress. But that will lead to inefficiency and so forth. But that's when we move on to the normative conclusion. But just the positive ones for the time being: competition reduces return to R&D. Innovation will increase when patent protection is strengthened. So if you strengthen people's rights to new knowledge that they're producing, then that will encourage them to innovate more. The diffusion of information will be more rapid where patent rights are more secure, because people can then trade in them, and it's part of the system that you're encouraging people to make information widely available by registering your patent. That stronger patent protection will increase economic growth. You know what this is all about. If it's true that people become more innovative because they've got patent rights now, then that will lead, with a bit of luck, perhaps, to more to increases in economic growth. That's the ultimate desire. And public research, especially in pure science, will increase growth. That's a linear model. The idea is that the least likely research we're going to get done is pure research with no apparent application immediately, but which may have lots and lots of spillover effects, and therefore the public will have to somehow contribute to that. The government will have to either subsidize it or undertake it. So that's the sort of way of thinking that you're led along when you get into this area. The normative conclusions, of course, then come naturally out of that, you're going to have, if you leave things alone, then you're going to have suboptimal research and technology, especially in pure science. Public policy is necessary, of course, to protect and enforce intellectual property rights. You need the normative side is we ought to have patent protection, that state action is required to supplement research effort and so forth. So government finance for scientific research. Okay, so that's the background, and the propositions still represent, I think, consensus view of economists. I've given you a quote here from 2021 handbook: fixed costs borne only by the first inventor, knowledge spillovers, and unhedged uncertainty combine to make innovation and hence growth suboptimal in laissez-faire. So that's a pretty, it's right at the end of a paper summarizing a whole range of contributions to the growth literature. What's the evidence for this? Does competition reduce the incentive to undertake R&D? Well, I can't go into all of these obviously now, but there are various approaches, but of course a lot of it will depend on what you mean by competition. But even when under the standard approach, we think of competition as being measured essentially by the elasticity of demand faced by, say, a firm. If in a perfectly competitive environment, according to the standard textbooks, you know that price is just parametric. There's nothing I can do about it. So under those kind of conditions, as we've already said, you will struggle to generate any research and development. But under more Schumpeterian types of competition, or maybe classical types, obviously you will get more. But in terms of the empirical evidence, well, there's very little evidence. Even if you adopt the conventional approaches to measuring competition in terms of elasticity, price elasticities, contrary to the Schumpeterian view, monopolistic rents do not seem necessarily to provide the resources to fund risky research activities. And more generally, ex-ante market power does not seem to promote future innovation and faster technological change. So this recent, well, not recent, about 10 years old study concluding that actually the evidence isn't as strong as you might expect, given that kind of intellectual background of the idea of competition actually restricting R&D. No evidence for that. How about patents increasing innovation, diffusion, and growth? Again, I have to skate over this, but just assert really that a tremendous amount of literature seems to indicate that there's very little connection between patents and growth. So that is again quite. I mean, it's a nuanced point. I mean, you can find studies with econometric results which show, you know, significant coefficients at certain points of time and over various sort of various periods of time. I mean, and various industries and so forth. There's a huge literature on this, but in general, it is surprising how little there is empirical support. How about publicly financed research, and does that? Is there any evidence that increases growth? Again, Terence is a person to talk about all of this in questions if people want to follow it up. But again, it's surprising that a lot of fairly official investigations have shown no such connection. And just to look at the data over the very, very, very long run, what I've shown in the graphs here is the log of GDP per head in 2011 dollars. This is from the Madison Project database. This is data going back to 1800 in the US. Notice how, Well, there's a tendency actually for the growth rate to creep up over time. I divided on the right hand graph between 4 different time periods: 1800 to 1850, 1850 to 1900, 1900 to 950, and so on. And you'll see how the rate of growth over those 50-year periods is creeping up. It's over about 2.2% in 1950 to 2000. But that doesn't seem to be connected very closely to any particular assistance from government, or not obviously from the patent system. It's true that the Americans had a patent system from the very beginning, so it's impossible perhaps to generalize just from looking at the United States experience. But my point is how just systematic that growth has been, and yet you had quite big changes, certainly just after the Second World War. In this third diagram here, the increase in federal government outlays for the conduct of R&D increased from about 0.3% of GDP up to over 2% of GDP in the 1960s. This was a great panic over Sputnik and so forth, and declined again. There's not much evidence that that makes much difference. What I've done there is put on a 100-year the rate of growth over the previous 100 years for the US and the UK, and how that's just generally crept up over time using the Madison database. That's GDP per head, the dynamics, in other words, of capitalist development, or whatever we call it, seem to have been pretty independent of any great introductions of huge amount of government assistance at any point. I mean, the whole 19th century growth was laissez-faire, really, rather than anything else. So that leads me then to the alternative assumptions. Now, the assumptions that I think are more Hayekian are, okay, the knowledge is in principle non-rival, but it is excludable independently of the patent system and without artificial attempts to enforce secrecy. We don't have to rely on patents for this. The entire stock of knowledge is not freely accessible. It's costly to access. In what sense? I'll skip 4 because that gets me into philosophical areas that I think we won't have time to get into. But the new knowledge is not codifiable. It contains components that are tacit and embedded in personal experience, as I've said here. So that's we depart then from Romer's point about the knowledge being a knowledge in books and disembodied and so on. It's embedded in personal experience, and the new knowledge emerges not from a production function, but from a cooperative social network. I think that's those are the sort of differences. So you've got a kind of, nobody's denying that knowledge is not non-rival, but all the other rather extreme assumptions that went into standard theory we're changing. So let me move on. Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry. There we are. Okay, so let's say a little bit more about tacit knowledge. The point is that Terence and I in our 2014 paper simply asserted that, well, this knowledge, scientific knowledge was tacit in a sense that it will not automatically spill over to anyone. But we didn't discuss really the nature of, in any detail, the nature of tacit knowledge. It's not, I mean, we've heard about Hayek's knowledge of time and place, knowledge that won't be known to a central planner and so forth. Well, that's certainly true of the knowledge we have in mind. You could look at it like that, but I think some of knowledge, the knowledge and time and place that Hayek has in mind might be quite objective in a philosophical sense, just that it's highly distributed, but it wouldn't stop people communicating that local knowledge to others fairly quickly. Maybe not to centre, but other people. So from a purely philosophical point of view, it's difficult to know that all of it would be tacit. I mean, the extreme tacit, the example of tacit knowledge given in Polanyi is sort of riding a bike, where you can only take it in by doing it yourself. Nobody can tell you. You can observe someone riding a bike, and then you just have to learn to do it. So I wouldn't like to claim that scientific knowledge was like riding a bike, I think that would be a risky position to take. So we're not really making that view, but nevertheless, some of Hayek's knowledge of time and place would come into this. Curzon's entrepreneurial knowledge, that is very much time and place type knowledge, but Curzon asserts that is costless. That is the return to pure alertness. People notice things, so it's hardly relevant to research and development. Which the whole problem of research and development is a very costly business, and we've got to get a return on it. So that's a very interesting. Curzon's line is very interesting for the development of the market and how information gets dispersed through the market in a very Hayekian way, no doubt. But it's not quite salient to what we're thinking of, I think. How about personal skills accrued through pure experience? Well, I think that's right. I mean, that's very much associated with theories of the firm, as we've heard earlier. People like Oliver Williamson and so on have written about this, with resources taking on information, which is very difficult to simply trade with others. This is it leads to all sorts of transactional problems because people become specific to various environments and so forth. So that's another form of tacit knowledge. The Schumpeterian sort of entrepreneurial knowledge, again, quite important because it shows what's important about that. I think is it shows how difficult it is to distribute knowledge sometimes. I mean, the established economic paradigm is always worrying about information getting out very, very simply and costlessly. Whereas what a lot of the business literature is about is the difficulty of communicating new knowledge to people. So you get vertical integration when new industries develop, because it's almost impossible to contract with people. You don't know what you're contracting over. And communicating, these new ideas is so difficult. So that suggests that these new ideas, it's not they're not disembodied knowledge costlessly available to everybody. It's you have to work at getting this information across. And of course, the 1990s was full of discussion of competitive advantage from people like Chandler and Porter. This was knowledge accrued over time by teams of people in environments which were then difficult to imitate by others because the knowledge was tacit. But it was, here we're getting closer to what Terence and I are talking about, because it was communal in nature. That is, that it's developed within the teams over time, and a new firm couldn't just come along and just copy it. Very, very difficult to do that. Okay. Go the right way this time. How about science? Well, again, this is where we argue that scientific knowledge is a form of contribution good. That is, it doesn't spill over to people who don't have the training and background and so on. Free riding, we argue, is much less of a problem than appears in standard theory. It doesn't. It does spill over to those who are equipped to receive it, and these will be people who are engaged in the business of research and so on, and they gain from associating with others who are also investigating the same problems. So you get spill-ins and spill-outs and so on, but the point is that this is the gain from others and the contribution of your own research to others are sort of part of the same process. Without the contribution, you would find it difficult to interpret what others are doing. I suggested really that and this does bring this very close to what Pavel was talking about a minute ago or two. It's the idea really that research is about a conversation. This is knowledge as a common resource that contributors created jointly through mutual association. I've actually quoted McCloskey here. Well, I haven't quoted her, but nevertheless, I quoted the book, The Economy as a Conversation. No, a chapter, The Economy as a Conversation, in her 1994 book. Basically, at that point, Deirdre McCloskey wasn't talking about research and development particularly, but nevertheless, I'm just extending, saying that, well, actually, a lot of research effort is about that too. Learning a language, if you like. That's where the contribution good comes from. And then I mentioned how close we are to Potts' discussion of the innovation commons. So really what we've got is a common resource developed by a lot of communicating scientists. And that gives rise to an entirely different sort of dynamic. What I won't be able to go over the technicalities here, but I've got them here. We'll write it up in the final paper, obviously. But I contrast in this slide the public good model on the left. And many of you, perhaps most, will recognise the sort of game theory approach with the various strategies, contribute, withhold, and so forth. The free rider problem, the prisoner's dilemma, essentially, the public good framework. But against that, you have the contribution good framework on the other side. The point is that there is the difference between those payoff matrices exists in one simple parameter, and that's theta, which represents the degree of spillover to people who haven't made any contribution. And it could be theta could be 0. That would make it a pure contribution good. No benefits spill over to people who haven't contributed. It could be 1, which would make it a public good, the same as a public good. So in a way, theta varies, and it's a parameter which is kind of indicating the degree of tacitness of the knowledge. If we do that, you get you can adopt an evolutionary model in which cooperative types are a particular percentage of the population, if you like. So you imagine a population of scientists. There's a contribution, a cooperative type, and a sort of a type which will not cooperate, a withhold type, if you like. The proportion of cooperative types in the population will change over time. This is the change with respect to time on the vertical axis, dx by dt. And this is simple sort of biological model, evolutionary game theory model, which was actually developed in the Journal of Game Theory by people, by a number of scholars from Turkey, actually, I think, who took Terence's my work from 2014 and sort of developed this evolutionary approach or use of evolutionary game theory. But it has a simple message, of course. Okay, if there's a certain amount of spillover, here I've got theta equal to 0.5. So we're not dealing with a perfect contribution good here, but you need a certain critical mass of people to enable you to take off, so to speak. Once you do, then you get the x by t is positive until you get a fully cooperative equilibrium. But you do need that critical mass to begin with to kick it off. Oh, I go backwards. Sorry. Obviously, you can change this parameter. The higher is theta, the bigger the spillovers, and the nearer you get to this conventional economics view. Notice that when theta is 1, you get the public good case, and cooperation is impossible. So what this tells us is that the degree of tacitness is absolutely crucial. So it is important whether this tacit knowledge in terms of science is a significant thing or not, or whether science is objective or disembodied, as is often claimed. Well, I've got various historical examples there. The examples concern the difficulty of getting people to take new ideas seriously, actually. That's essentially what I'm talking about there. So I've looked at various studies, mainly from historians of economic thought, people like Petra Moser on patents and so forth, looking at attitudes to new ideas and how difficult they are to become accepted, how often cooperative technological development occurs. So there's a historical section here where on these slides, which we will write up. And I do visit the patent controversy, a very famous paper actually by Macluff and Penrose, concerning the patent controversy in the mid-19th century. And it's very interesting there that all the free traders were anti-patent. They saw patents as a sort of a way of enforcing monopoly restrictions, and were extremely suspect as a result, and preventing the sort of small improvements that you get through gradual incremental improvements that you get through competition, through the competitive process. That was standard thinking. I mean, if one thinks about someone, Matt Ridley's book on the way innovation works, I mean, once a new breakthrough has been made, okay, that's a starting point, but usually the productivity gains on top of that are hugely important. And happen incrementally. So it's not surprising that patents can get in the way sometimes. So the concluding comments, well, I made a few points about rationalism and the problem of excessive rationalism in economics. Nevertheless, our present view is highly constraining of explaining growth. The idea that knowledge is a disembodied public good is wrong, that on the whole, one is more likely to get nearer to an explanation of the way economies develop by thinking of knowledge as a tacit and embodied contribution good, embodied, that is, in people and so forth. They have to meet one another to make use of it. I've quoted from Baldrine, who's written several articles in this area. Let me just find, oh, I was going the wrong way. The final point, I think that I've said here at the top that entrepreneurs in classically competitive markets invest in R&D to profit from their own research and that of other firms. In other words, the fact that they're getting, they have to put up with the spill outs in order to get the spill ins. And in fact, it's almost impossible to determine, which is which sometimes, probably. They have to have a research staff to interpret the new developments that are going on. The diffusion process that as tacit knowledge does diffuse through personal contact and experience, if you like, then this is how knowledge goes throughout eventually gets into the economy more widely. And this discovery and diffusion process is really what I've called here the classically competitive market in operation, and requires evolutionary type analysis rather than this mechanical maximizing analysis that you get normally in economics.